Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good afternoon. We have the very good fortune to have with us today Dr. Joe McCarthy, currently at Intel Research Seattle. Dr. McCarthy has been doing an extensive amount of work looking at what happens when screens get large and then notice that you're in front of them. And so these proactive displays, an interesting term and an interesting emerging technology. He'll tell us a good deal about his work in that area, including some really interesting work that I experienced at UbiComp, where things, as you stood in front of the coffee pot, for example, you and your neighbor, both reaching for the coffee, would be identified to one another. A potentially interesting experience. So with that, I hope you'll join me in welcoming Dr. McCarthy.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks very much for coming. I'm going to start off sketching in fairly broad strokes an area that I call revelationary computing. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. And then go on to say something about proactive displays, which I consider a part of revelationary computing, an instantiation or a mechanism to achieve that. And then get even more specific and tell you about a specific project in which we deployed a bunch of proactive displays in a conference context, in fact, the UbiComp conference context. So I want to start off by just noting that people have long revealed things about themselves wittingly and unwittingly in the physical world. I start off with music for reasons that will become apparent in a few minutes. But, you know, if you're carrying around boom boxes, blaring music out of your house, out of your car, you know, you are projecting something about yourself. You're revealing something about yourself to anyone who's within earshot. People wear T-shirts of various kinds that denote certain things about themselves or their experiences or their predilections. You know, so here's a woman who I suspect probably is a pilot. Chicks fly airplanes too, is what this T-shirt says. Here's someone who's either been to Myrtle Beach or knows someone who's been there or just likes Myrtle Beach or actually maybe just bought it in a secondhand store. Whatever the case may be, he's probably projecting something about himself that people would assume means he's been to Myrtle Beach. You know, we can get away from clothing and actually look at tattooing, and I was going to include some photos of piercings, but I decided to just draw the line here. I think whether one has a tattoo and the types of tattoos and perhaps where they are all say something about the person and reveal something about them. This is one of my favorite examples. This is a woman who was visiting us recently, a friend from Illinois who came out, and she said she bought this photo tote bag, and she inserted photos of her family in it. And she did this because she wanted to remind herself why she was working. She was spending time away from her family, and in part so she could earn income to enjoy a better life with her family. But the unintended side effect of carrying this thing around was that people would come up to her and say, oh, is that, actually the dog got the most commentary. But, oh, is that your dog? Is that your kids? And people actually gravitated towards her and started conversations with her based on the fact she was carrying around this bag. I mean, we've all seen coffee mugs and you know, T-shirts with pictures on them, and typically the mugs stay at the desk. And you know, grandpa T-shirts probably only get worn by grandpa when the grandkids are visiting, I suspect. So here's a more general mechanism by which people can kind of, you know, reveal something about themselves wherever they go. Certainly, you know, buttons that you might wear, especially this time of year, lawn signs and so on, reveal something about yourself. License plates. I just love vanity plates. I've always been impressed with people who have like this passion, this one passion, or at least some passion they feel so strongly about, they'll get a vanity plate about. So, you know, here's someone who I'm assuming, you know, likes dancing, Texas two-step from Montana. And here's someone who I'm assuming likes guns from Ontario. Actually just recently finally got around to seeing Bowling for Columbine, Michael Moore's earlier film. I was surprised to learn that Canada actually has more guns per capita than the U.S. does. Anyhow, the last example that I'll show here is that, even the way people decorate their homes or their desks says something about themselves. And here's a rather elaborately ornate workspace of a colleague at Intel who has various photographs, flags, doohickeys, and whatnot to kind of say different things about that person. And of course, you're all familiar with lots of other examples of this. So there's a long been a tradition of revealing things about people, about themselves. Increasingly, we're seeing that there are more and more mechanisms for revealing things about people in the digital world. And as in the physical world, sometimes this is on purpose, and sometimes this is quite by accident. So certainly, instant messaging is one way that people reveal things about themselves. But in particular, I want to draw attention to the emoticons that people use, and increasingly away messages that people use to let someone know about something about themselves as well. So even if you're not communicating with that person, just by looking in your friend's window or the buddy's window, you'll get to know something about what's going on there. Weblogs. We could talk about, the death rate of weblogs, and I know that there's been some work done here about the death rate of live journal accounts, for example. But I think it's pretty obvious that there are more and more weblogs being created, and not all of them are dying instantly. So I think this is a growing trend as well. I'm not going to say, I don't know what's going on with social networks at this point, to be honest. I don't know if they're on the rise or on the death. I know I've stopped responding to invitations. There's so many of them proliferating and so on, but at least they were all the rage, and they probably get another way that people were revealing things about themselves. In the first of what will be a few different, special, clearly this is known here at Microsoft Research, right? So the Wallet system that the social computing group is actually tying together all these things and more, okay, and letting people reveal things about themselves, in a more sort of cohesive fashion. I'm looking forward to the point where I either get invited to join it or at least can kind of experiment when it goes out publicly. But I think it's kind of a neat idea that is going on here to try to tie together some of these various mechanisms people are using to do that. Furthermore, again, this is obvious to some people here at Microsoft. News groups is another place where people have revealed things about themselves. And in fact, the archiving of news groups means that things that you reveal about yourself in news groups that you might have thought were somewhat temporary actually stick around a long time. The things that you buy, the things that you sell, and even the nature of the transactions and reputations that you build up about them are another thing that's available out there online, as are the types of reviews that you make and the things that people think about those reviews as well on Amazon. And then finally, I just want to mention online dating is a growing area. Supposedly, they've done a count. The last counts I saw were that 50% of adults in the U.S. have logged on to an online dating site. I'm not sure how they figure out, how many people have multiple usernames, say, or whatever, but it does show that at least a lot of people are using these. And in yet another mention, clearly Mark and his group and others, know about this sort of reputation system and what you might be able to mine automatically with the NetScan project that they've done here in the Community Technologies group. So I say this by preface to this notion of revelationary computing, which I see as a mechanism through which, or an approach to which, we can look to bridge the gap. So people revealing things in the physical world, people revealing things in the digital world. Is there a way we can tie these things together? And in particular, is there a way that we can bring to bear in the physical spaces that we share something about the digital representations we have of ourselves? And going the opposite direction, is there a way to incorporate something about the things that we do in the physical world into the digital representations we have of ourselves? So there's a way to kind of build a branch in there. So here's a bunch of pictures of me, and actually there's actually a bunch of different, there's probably some Microsoft people here too as well. Mark's right there. Got a few conference contacts, the only photos I could find of myself. And then this is a profile of myself from the UbiComp community directory, my main web page, my Workit profile. There's lots of stuff out there. There's a way to kind of bring these things to bear in an effective way. And of course, this is not untread territory either. The Social Computing Group has been looking at some of these issues through the Here Now project, where they're allowing people to share information about themselves in physical spaces, leave behind traces of themselves, however they want to do that. And then the Project Aura is sort of going in the opposite direction, at least in my view. It's a way of using a barcode scanner on a handheld device to reveal things underlying the products that we see on shelves, but artwork and other things as well. So, as we move in this direction of revelationary computing, as is probably obvious to many of you, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because the more that we reveal ourselves, about ourselves, to other things, other people, on the one hand, the more they're able to respond in hopefully appropriate and beneficial ways, but of course, there could also be detrimental ways this could happen as well. So as just a couple of examples, a couple of favorite examples, an earlier project I worked on was called Music FX. In Music FX, if you were willing to reveal your musical preferences to the fitness center environment by badging in after having created a profile of your musical tastes, the music center or the music system would adapt the music playing to that group of people there. So it was a dynamically adaptive system. So people didn't actually reveal information to each other. They revealed it to the system, and the system played DJ. So in general, we had, at the high point, I think we had somewhere near 500 people who were enrolled in the system. I did this when I was with Accenture Technology Labs. We had a fitness center in the basement of our Northbrook Technology Park. There were about 1,000 people in the park, and about half of them signed up for the system. I'm not sure what proportion of people were actually members of the fitness center. And it was used for about 3 years. And I'll just warn you right now, I can tell you all kinds of really interesting stories about this, but only if you ask. So we'll see how much time I leave at the end and how interested you really are in this. After Music FX, another system I worked on was called Groupcast. With Groupcast, we had a network of infrared badges. Again, this is at Accenture. And people created profiles themselves that had, among other things, their favorite websites. The idea was then, as Teresa and I crossed paths in front of this large display, it's not that large by today's standards, the system would notice that we were both there, look at the intersection of our favorites, and pop something up that would reveal something that we have in common, and thereby create conversation opportunities. I'll just, again, I could tell you some stories about this, but one of the interesting things we found was with a small set of people, it turns out this intersection set's pretty small, and if you didn't choose websites that were frequently updated, it got pretty boring pretty fast. So we actually then started just choosing randomly among your favorite websites. And it turned out that created conversation opportunities too. One of my colleagues half-jokingly said, well, maybe you should just choose any old website and see what happens then. We never actually went quite that far. Okay, so two more examples I wanted to mention are, I had knee surgery about 2 years ago, and one of the things I discovered was a lot of people have had knee surgery in the world, or at least in the places I was traveling. Not only that, the people who have had knee surgery are really eager to share their experiences. And again, so it was kind of, on the one hand, interesting to know that I'm not alone. On the other hand, it wasn't like people were coming up and saying, oh yeah, everything turned out really well. You know, now I'm walking, skiing, everything's fine. It was actually quite the opposite for the majority of them. And actually, I had actually seen an earlier example of this, the 2 times my wife was pregnant. Another example where there's some sort of, you're revealing something quite obviously about your condition, and something that, well, a large percentage of the population can relate to. And there are a few things. Again, just like with me, people are happy, women are especially happy to come up, ask questions, relate their stories. Again, very few of which are positive, like, oh yeah, I had a really easy labor, everything went fine, smooth, and then after that it was fun too. But the other thing that was kind of interesting about this one, no one actually reached out and touched my knee. Well, maybe it's because it was injured, but women would walk up and actually touch her belly. Well, I never quite understood this. It wasn't frequent, but it was enough so that I was kind of wondering, I don't know. Fortunately, she didn't get all bent out of shape about it, and I tried not to either. But just another interesting dimension of this kind of thing. Okay, so where does this take us then? So this large notion of revelationary computing, that we can use technology somehow to reveal things about ourselves, and that will, at least in some cases, maybe result in some benefits. In particular, I want to narrow it down now into, what if we use just large displays, and we connect them to sensors somehow, and we, of course, have some algorithms, some code, some policies enforced, and so on, and we use these to explore, how can we create something that can sense and respond in appropriate ways to the people and or activities that are taking place nearby. And in particular, I'm going to further constrain this in that I want the interaction, if it could be called such, to be very sort of low-key. In fact, interaction is probably too strong a word. What I want is to be able to have these things be able to sense people implicitly and respond in a way that's not in their faces, but sort of in an ambient way, maybe off on the periphery somehow, which is very much in keeping with the sort of calm technology theme that Mark Weiss first articulated when he was defining ubiquitous computing. Now, within this, I would say there's a lot of issues, but I'll just mention 3 here. Okay, if you have this kind of capability to deploy displays with sensing capabilities. Where are you going to put them? What kind of context, physical context, makes sense to put these? Because, there's a lot of places where, frankly, you probably don't want something, knowing we're there and trying to do something helpful, or maybe even not helpful. Okay, even if once we figure out the context, and in fact, I think relating to the context is what kind of stuff should go onto that display. And I think, again, that will matter. Okay, I'll mention something else about music effects. I'll try not to go into too much. One of the interesting things we found when people filled out their surveys, we had 91 different kinds of music. It was a satellite feed, and it was commercial-free, genre-based music. So you had 70s rock, 80s rock, 90s rock, 90s rock. Actually, that is about it. You had Norwegian folk music. You had mariachi. You had a wide variety of things. Many people said they like opera, but they don't want to listen to it when they're working out. As though I'm looking through these making judgments about people. But anyhow, I just mentioned that in part because the content is dependent on the context. And if we were to deploy something like in a music system that would respond to the people nearby in a bar, it would be probably different. Or in a meditation center. I mean, I think that a lot of different places would have different sorts of things. The content would be very heavily dependent on the context. And then finally, the control issues. Okay, so even if you have something deployed there, you have some collection of contents available that you can use in this context, how are you going to let people, how are they going to control what goes on there? And I'll show you some examples of that when I get to the work that we did at UbiComp. But before I talk about that, I just wanted to talk about some contrasting examples, or things that I consider that can be contrasting examples of displays. So you can talk about proactive displays, but there's also just static displays. Okay, and the example I'm showing here is, I can't remember if this is Toronto or Malaysia. No, it's the Marta system. And so what they have is they have 200 panels that are 3 by 3, and they have just a backlit bulb. And what they find is, I think it's around 5 miles per hour that you get a pretty good, almost a 30 frame per second kind of array. I forget the exact breakdown. You can probably do the math if you really cared about it. But the idea is here, I mean, this is actually obviously not a typical example of a static display, but even a static display can have some activity, so to speak, to it. And you can imagine, actually, if there's some way to change the individual panels, that you could have a responsive system as well. And then there's, of course, other displays that do change. And so there's the SIVA picture frame, where it can download new sets of pictures from the internet. This is called the gallery player. Gallery player can show to very fine degree resolution digitized artwork, and is actually one in the Bellevue Public Library. That's not a picture from there, I don't think, though. The Milwaukee Transit System has TVs on buses. You've probably seen them in elevators, or you may have more likely seen them in elevators. I know I've seen them. Clear Channel, I think, runs that. And then you may have seen how there's more and more, how should I say, electronic billboards that either have animated graphics of various kinds, or at least they can change the display that's being shown, so there's some dynamism there. However, again, in all of these cases, they're just kind of, the content's just kind of being fed out there without any interactivity, without any sense, if you will, of who or what's going on around it. A couple other examples, again, some work done here. I know that the Vibe group has done some work, at least in the past, on interactions with large displays. Okay, so where people are actually walking up and manipulating the content. So here's the drag and pop, a picture from the drag and pop system that they did here. I know that there was an appliance store in Redmond that was selling a screen fridge. I saw them at the Home Store a year ago. And I don't know if Microsoft is actually involved in that work or not. I'm sure it's running Windows. But again, there you've got a display embedded into a refrigerator door that people can manipulate. I don't want to say too much about this, but just again to kind of expand the notion of the context in which displays might be deployed. Here's one that's deployed in a public bathroom, and I'll just leave. And it is actually interactive, but I won't go into the details of the interaction unless you're really interested. I can always explain it to you later. Two more examples I wanted to mention here. This is the Sunset at 200 Megahertz project done at Park back in the late 90s. A couple of Sony Jumbotrons outside the Billboard Club, and there was a sequence of images that would play as well as a soundtrack. And people could point their garage door openers and their key fobs at this, and it would sense them and actually alter the sequence of images and or adjust the music based on that. To be honest, I don't know if anyone ever had sort of a model of how the interaction was supposed to take place. I think it was just sort of a fun thing to do while you're either stuck in traffic outside or waiting in line to get into the club. And then finally, I'll mention that here's the love board from Hachiko Crossing in Tokyo, where people can send images and/or text messages from their cell phones and have it displayed. I know LG Electronics now has one in Times Square, and I think they've got another one going up in Toronto as well. So coming to a city near you, this kind of capability will be possible. So again, but it has to do, people are explicitly interacting in all these cases and doing something with some kind of intention, at least, to have something happen. And then finally, there's a category I might characterize as hyperactive. Clear Channel Communications put up 80 of these large displays outside subway stations throughout Manhattan. These are broadcasting various advertising messages to people. Some of the people consider these rather visually loud and have complained vociferously, and actually, in at least 2 cases, as far as I knew, as of last fall, resulted in 2 of these being taken down. I don't know what the current count is, but I'm sure you've seen some of the displays on the road. Actually, here's one from Silicon View. I mean, if you've gone down Route 5, you've probably seen the corridor there around Tacoma where these things are just, like visually shouting at you. Oh, there's the LG Electronics display there. And, I forget. I forgot. This is the Hershey's display. This is actually the most, I call it convoluted. They had a nicer term for it at the Outdoor Sign website. But this has the most number of displays concentration in all of Times Square, which is saying something in terms of the different kinds of displays there, the amount of bulbs, and so on. So, but again, in a way, I mean, none of these are responding to the people nearby. They're just sort of, almost shouting at people in a visual sense. Now, there is a system, I think, that shows a step toward what I would consider to be a proactive display. There's a system, Alaris has a network of e-boards. There are 10 of these installed on the road between Sacramento and Oakland in California. And these electronic billboards have associated with them what's called a MobiTrack unit. And the MobiTrack unit can sense the FM frequencies that are being tuned to by the cars that are going by. In the initial press reports, and actually this is what it says here too, it's like really cool idea. These could dynamically adjust the content to the people going by at any given moment. Okay? It turns out, the last I could tell, what they've done is they've done some sampling over a period of time, and they've determined the radio stations that are generally listened to at certain times of the day, certain days of the week, maybe even certain times of the year. And they use those sort of, compiled demographics to sell the advertising, to sell the ad space to certain customers. So even though the idea is pretty good, it in fact doesn't map out. And as Mark and I were talking about earlier, it would be kind of hard, at least in this context, with the traditional, billboard advertising model, to come up with a way to do it more dynamically. Although certainly the web gives lots of examples where that kind of thing can be done. So there might be. I was going to say hope, but I guess it depends on how you feel about targeted advertising and whether you'd rather have something pop up, if you're a guitar player that, you listen to something where you'd like to know about a guitar sale, or you'd rather have something that, doesn't respond to you in any kind of way. What I like about the idea, at least here, is that there's no identity released here. People are just, they're just kind of doing their normal stuff. They're just driving by, they've got their radios tuned to whatever they're listening to. It's not intrusive. Well, we could maybe argue that, but I don't consider it very intrusive. And, it's just sort of compiling stuff and responding in the aggregate. Okay, in a way, it's sort of like the Music FX system, which never forced people to reveal their identities to each other, although we kind of still had a log of who was there. All right. So enough about those things. In terms of the research agenda here, there's really 3 primary themes I want to emphasize that we're looking at. One is the social aspect of these things. Is there ways that we can employ digital technology, for example, practice displays, in such a way that we can enhance, create new interactions, or perhaps enhance existing ones among people, or maybe even create new relationships in the shared physical spaces. So unlike virtual communities, and a lot of good work has been done to show how people can form bonds across distances of space and time, I end up spending a lot of my time sharing space with other people, and in many cases don't know much about these people. Now, admittedly, there's cases in which maybe I don't want to know too much about them, but I think there's lots of times when I would kind of be interested in something about the people who are nearby. I mean, certainly when they're, when they've got tattoos or are wearing certain kinds of T-shirts or other things, I can make inferences about them already. And in a way, you might consider this. There's some work being done on location-aware computing or location-enhanced computing. I kind of flip this around and say, well, is there a way we can use computers to enhance locations? And is there ways you can use the situation of physical spaces and use computing technology in a way that can enhance these experiences of these places? Another theme that pervades not just this, but all the work I've done is this notion that might be called living labs. Okay, it's one thing to design, build, deploy it to a group of friends or within a lab environment. The group cast system I showed you before. Oh, there are about 20 of us who were in the lab, and most of us wore badges, and a smaller number, maybe 10 or 15 filled out profiles. But we were all friends already, and it really, whatever we learned there may or may not have mapped very well to real-world settings. I think you can learn an awful lot by putting things out there. I know that's something that a theme that a lot of people in Microsoft research also share. And then finally, one of the defining characteristics of this approach is that I'm really, again, I emphasize this with the largest e-boards, minimally intrusive. Common technology is a way to do this so that as much as possible you can leverage existing practices, leverage existing places. Don't make people go to a new place. Just take advantage of where they're already going. Take advantage of what they already do there. Take advantage of things they already have, or with minimal perturbations at least, so that you can not, so you can really see if there's a way to do this without, having to introduce all kinds of new practices, devices, and places. Okay, so on to the Experience UbiComp project. Just two quick things here about motivations at the high level. I was chairing UbiComp 2003, and I knew that I'd be devoting an awful lot of energy and attention to the conference, and therefore I figured, if I'm going to be devoting this much energy, maybe I should kind of orient my research in this direction. And it just so happens that, well, conferences are a place that people come together, and actually they come together in large part for the desire for mutual revelation. So you can always read the proceedings later, especially from a single-track conference. It's not like there's that much being presented there. But I think one of the real things that drives people to go there is these interactions you can have at the conference, that you can not only show and tell about your work, but learn about others and their work. And I also want to note, though, along this regard, that the opportunities for revelation are very unevenly distributed at a conference. If you're presenting a paper and you're up on the stage, especially in a single-track conference, you get to show and tell more people than other people who don't get that opportunity. So if there's a way to kind of spread this out, spread these opportunities out there, I think everyone benefit. Because certainly, yes, there's a filtering process, and one hopes that the best work gets chosen for presentation and so on. But in fact, there's lots of other interesting things going on at a conference, not just the things that are happening, at the podium. A quick thing. I probably don't need this here, but when I give this talk elsewhere, Experience UbiComp project, so, Ian, okay, I probably don't need to bring up the Experience Music Project. Okay, another nice thing about conferences is that even though the conference context itself is somewhat restricted or constrained, right? People are gathering for a small period of time. They share certain set of common interests. Some of them already know each other. Even within that context, there are sub-contexts that are even more constrained in certain ways. So certain kinds of things happen at a paper or panel session. Other sorts of things happen when you kind of you create a demo or a poster session where people kind of mill about rather than there's a single focus of attention. And then there's yet another context in which there's really no single focus of attention. There's just, coffee break reception. The goal is just kind of mill about and visit with people. Another nice thing, so again, I mentioned context, content, and control, is that there's available content. People already wear name badges. They already fill out registration. But if you're on the stage presenting something, or if you're giving a poster or demo, your name's out there already. So there's already sort of this practice of making content available. We actually took advantage of this, and I'll talk a little more about this, but we also want to, do a little bit of implicit content finding using data mining on home pages. I'll come back to that in a minute when I talk about one application in particular. And then finally, we really did want to manage the control process. As you might imagine, Intel, ever since a certain issue arose about serial numbers, is very sensitive to the notion of privacy. And in fact, I learned this actually only 2 weeks before the conference. I won't go into that. There's a special group within Intel that is, formed to make sure that we never have something, arise like what happened with the serial number issue. So we had to be very careful to make sure that we didn't violate anyone's privacy. And so therefore, the registration, people had to be very explicit about participating. It's not like, you showed up and we snuck a RFID tag in your badge and you were surprised wherever you went. You had to create a separate profile. You had to activate an RFID tag. You had to carry it around with you. And at any time, you could just simply stop wearing the tag. You could toss it out. You could do other things I'll mention in a minute. You could delete the profile. We gave people as much control as we possibly could so that, as few nasty surprises might occur. Although there were still some unanticipated experiences I'll mention. So here's the registration page. We did require that people give us their email address and their name because we needed to send them a password in order to be able to, update their profile. And, a name didn't seem like it was that far out of the normal practice of having a name on a badge. They could also give us their affiliation and a photo of themselves. We also asked them, is there some picture that represents something about which you'd be happy to talk with anyone at the conference? And we called that Ticket to Talk, based on the work of Rfid Tags and his analysis of conversations. Some early testing revealed that sometimes people provided pictures that didn't really start conversation, or if they did, it was kind of like, what the heck is that? So we decided, okay, let's give them the option of giving us a little caption as well so they can describe what it is we're looking at. We asked them, all of this is optional, we asked them to give us their home page. If they had more than one, obviously they could choose what it was. And then finally they could add, they could put a few words about their interests, especially if they didn't have a home page or chose not to give it to us or anything else. We at least have something that we could do for them. Then, as I mentioned before, we had RFID tags that they would go to a kiosk. They would bring up their profile, hit a button on the screen, and that would associate the profile with that physical RFID tag, which could then, conveniently enough, fit just right inside the conference badge sleeve. And then they could walk around and in a few choice locations in the conference experience proactive displays. And I'll mention a little bit about each of these in turn. So first of all, the conference was held at the Westin Seattle, and we had, it's been long enough now, I can't remember. I think it was the 4th floor level to ourselves. And, there's a lot of detail here that these were the 2 big demo rooms. Some of you were actually there, right, demoing things, so you know this intimately. This was where the presentations were held. Everyone's facing this way. I'll show you a photo there. And we had the speaker of one of the applications off to the side there. We had another one called the Ticket to Talk right here. This is where the coffee break area was. So people would come in right through the doors, and it was right there. And then if they wanted to experience the neighborhood window, they had to go way back into the back corner. And I mention this for a reason. It'll become clear in a moment. Okay, Auto Speaker ID. Auto Speaker ID is an example of what I characterize as irritation-based research. I don't know about the rest of you, but when I go to a conference, someone goes up, asks a question at the microphone stand, and I'm wondering, who the heck is that and why are they asking that question? Now, at some conferences, people will be asked to introduce themselves when they go to ask a question. What's your name and affiliation? Give me some context about this. But people don't always listen to those instructions, and even when they do, sometimes they say what it is, and I can't understand them. Or even if I understand them, wow, especially international conferences, how do you spell that name if I want to follow up later on? So we thought, hey, what if we just visually augmented the common practice of orally introducing yourself by doing a screen pop near the front of the room that would just show name, affiliation, and a photo of yourself. As people, and right here you can see we had a microphone stand, and if you were wearing a tag in your badge, we had an antenna right here that would pick it up. We actually, I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of times, I've never understood this practice. When people walk up to the microphone stand, they'll ask their question, and they'll step to the side. So we were concerned that if the Shajin went up and asked the question and stepped to the side, all of a sudden it would change the person standing behind them. So we actually had to turn down the gain so that it was only about, at most, a meter. And that actually resulted, we were probably too concerned that we missed reading some badges. The other thing people do that I've never understood, which is even more confusing, is they'll walk up, they'll ask the question, and they'll turn around and go back to their seat. I've never, I guess, I don't know why they're asking questions if they're not standing. Well, I guess they can hear it as they're walking by. But anyhow, so what we did here, okay, I've said enough about this. Let me show you a little bit more about just the layout here. And, well, I guess you probably picked that all up. One of the things we wanted to make sure is we didn't want to be stealing the show. We wanted these to be augmenting rather than taking over. And so, actually, 2 days before the conference, we found out that, we were anticipating, maybe 375 people and over 500 people were registered. We had to shift, we had a lot of things to change around. We had to reorient things. So we actually thought we'd have one main display and one loudspeaker ID. Then we had to move to a larger room where we had two displays, kind of like this room, and then we kind of had to tuck this into the corner. And one of the unfortunate things that happened, I'll talk a little more about the evaluation in a moment, was that, the experience of auto speaker ID was very different for people sitting up here who, might look this way to see the person asking the question, look this way to the stage, and then have to look this way to see what was going on with auto speaker ID than for, say, someone like along here where they can kind of take it all in one fell swoop. Okay, the second application was called Ticket to Talk. In this case, we deployed a large display, a plasma display in this case. The other one was a projected display. We had two RFID antennas on either side of it that were not, the gain was not turned down, so they had a range of somewhere around, I think it was somewhere around 5 meters. I'm trying to think now, what was it, 5, maybe 10 meters. As people walked up, what we did essentially, remember I mentioned that we asked people, give us the one thing you'd be happy to talk about. And as people walked up, it would essentially show that. We see the same information as we saw with all speaker ID, name, affiliation, and picture, and then in the center of the screen, hey, here's the thing I'd be happy to talk to you about, along with a caption. So actually, here's, and it responds to one person at a time, but then shows other people, at least 4 of the other people who were detected nearby. My passion, well, one of my passions is wine, and within the passion of wine, Amarone, and that's another thing I can get started about and go into raw detail. I'll come back to that in a minute.
How did you decide who the primary person was? Range.
That's a really good question. Do I have that? I think there we go. Great question. So what we did is we polled the reader to see how, and we did it every, was it 100 milliseconds? And essentially we had a fairly simple, you could play a lot of fun games with these weighting things, but we just simply said, what we wanted to say is, the more recently your tag has been seen, the higher your priority should be, all things being equal. And the more recent you've had your 5 seconds of fame, you should go down. So that if you and I are both standing there and we're both being seen, if it shows my ticket, I should go down below you at least in the priority queue so that you get a chance to have your thing pop up. And then if it's only the 2 of us, we'll just continuously cycle like that. I think that there's a lot more sophisticated and effective, perhaps, ways could be done, but we didn't do a lot of tuning, to be honest. We just set the weights to 50% in both cases and just let it rip.
It might depend on what your user's model of how this works and what they want out of it is, too.
Well, that brings up at least two really good issues. One, in terms of user model, we thought that having 4 people, 5 seconds at a time, 4 people, that should be fine. Turns out there were, like right after a presentation session when everyone rushes the line, there were maybe 10 people there. And because we were only showing 4 people, people would start taking their tags off and start waving them, saying, oh, see me, see me, see me. But because we had, made this design decision of a static, list, size list, we ran into problems. The other one is I think, another really interesting point, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, which is, okay, what were people trying to get out of this by sharing this data? What did Susie want to communicate by sharing this poster of the Trans-Siberian Rail? I actually know in these cases because these are my interns and me. But more broadly, of the 200 participants, we don't have, we never did go back and really assess in a careful way. We looked at the photos, but we never actually asked people. And actually, we intended to ask people at the conference. We had this whole great observation scheme. I'll get to that. So we got overwhelmed at the conference. We were not nearly prepared for a lot of things that came up. Anyone who's done a real deployment in limited time and space may be able to relate to some of this, or maybe all of you are better organized and prepared than I am in general. But we would have we had all kinds of things we were going to be interviewing people on the spot, and we weren't able to follow through on that. So another thing we did is we wanted to kind of minimize thrashing. Before we actually added some dampening in there, we found that, pictures would change like crazy without some kind of weighting function to kind of, smooth things out a little bit. So we thought 5 seconds would be the right time where you could glance at something and either take action or just move on with your life. The third application is called Neighborhood Window, and this represents, it has a similar goal. All of these applications have the goal of increasing awareness and interactions among the people, just in different contexts and slightly different ways, sometimes significantly different ways. This is closely related to Ticket to Talk in that it was in the same general room, But it differed in two significant ways. One is that rather than asking people explicitly, give us the picture and the caption, we said, give us your homepage and we'll dig around and find something interesting about you. And the second thing was that it responded to groups of people. So here, fortunately, we did not have the same problem as we had with Ticket to Talk, where people were wondering, hey, it's not seeing me, it's not seeing me. Now, originally, we had this set up as a lounge area. We had a couple of tables here and here. We had a couch. We thought people would be hanging out. This is just going to be an ambient display. Another thing that happened when we underestimated the size of the conference was that there was a lot of traffic through here. We had to get rid of the couch. The tables were getting in the way, so it turned out to be just kind of a display hanging out there, and it became sort of a novelty factor rather than a place that people would more naturally congregate, and I think that it impacted the experience that people had of it. I apologize for the quality of this display. I'll say something about this. This is actually not from a picture from the conference, but a slightly earlier prototype, and it has things from people that I have permission to use their content, which is one of the reasons I'm using it. So there's me, Eric Paulus, who's our demos co-chair, Anand Day, who is our program co-chair, and Bill Shillett, who's the co-director of the Seattle lab of Intel. Surprise, surprise, when it dug around, it found that all four of us had the word Intel on our websites. Oh, so I'm sorry, step back for a moment. The two types of words we were looking for using term frequency and inverse document frequency statistical measures that are common in the information retrieval world is the words that are shared by other people at the conference and the words that are not shared by anyone at the conference, thinking that the two most likely sets of words to create conversations among people are either things that we share in common or things that are kind of odd or unique or somehow different about us. So, not surprisingly, the four of us who all work for Intel have Intel on our webpage. Anand and Eric both have Berkeley. Bill and I both have Extended. I would expect that was from like a publication reference to an extended abstract or something like that. Anand and Bill both are on committees. And then Eric and Anand both have Evaluation. And Anand and I both have Ambient Displays, surprise, surprise. And then some of the other things that were unique about us is Eric had Embodiment. Okay, I saw Eric's talk when he was here, but surprise, surprise, Eric would have embodiment. And Tele, he was doing telerobotics for a while. I have the word peripheral, and then conference on computer, which I'm assuming is stuff as supported work, and Joseph. And then Anand had context prototyping, aware computing infrastructure, and that probably needed to have context in front of it, an undergraduate student. And then Bill had ACM Press, patent, United States patent. I suspect, here's kind of an interesting thing that came up repeatedly. Eric and Bill both had references to Ken Goldberg on their website. And so that was one of the things that fell out of this. I hadn't actually anticipated this, but it turns out if you co-author a paper or involve in a committee with someone or somehow both are listing them, that person's name is one of the things that's likely to pop out there. Okay, so we used the touch graph visualization tool in order to generate that graphic. I just will mention this. I was there yesterday because I was seeing if there was a logo I could use to pepper up my slide a little bit. Turns out they have a live journal visualization browser that is kind of a neat way of, LiveJournal is an online journal, sort of a blogging community where people can specify very explicit keyword-like interests and designate friends in a very structured way. And it's a pretty neat thing. If you're into that kind of thing, I'd just recommend it. Again, here's I guess things I already mentioned in terms of looking for both unique and shared words. We had to limit the crawling. Actually, it turned out we had one person who we came up with 1.5 million words. It was a German person, and so all of them were unique, and that kind of broke the model a little bit. We weren't able to deal with frames. You might imagine different things happen when people have different web presences, and as I mentioned, language was an issue. We did some very simple phrase finding. Early testing showed that some of the words just weren't very interesting, but if you can lump them together and create especially noun phrases, that it becomes a little more telling about what's going on. So after the conference, we sent out a survey. As I mentioned, we had about 500 people at the conference. Of that, approximately 200 people participated. That is, they registered and they activated their badges. We don't know whether they wore the badges or not, but they at least went that far. We sent around a survey that asked a whole bunch of questions. It includes some open-ended ones. The one that I was focused on here is we asked people, well, what do you think? Did these things have positive influence on your experience of the conference? Negative influence? Mixed? Or no impact whatsoever? Due to a coding error, we didn't actually get to differentiate between no impact and mixed impact, and that's kind of a bummer. The nice thing, and then there were a bunch of so the nice thing is, though, pretty consistently, people generally thought, if they at least had an opinion about the applications, that there was a positive opinion about them. Notice, though, there's pretty big differences between the number of opinions voiced on these, and of course that's reflected in the ones that people didn't even answer, and that's why I took a little bit of time to point out where these things were. Almost everyone experienced auto speaker ID, like it or not. I mean, even if you didn't ask a question, you saw a question being asked. Ticket to Talk, there were actually, I should have known that. I was running around with my head cut off at that conference. I didn't even realize we had 2 coffee stations. So you could have gone to the coffee station right outside the main room, or you could have gone to the one inside the demo room. So it could be that a lot of people never even saw the Ticket to Talk because they were using the main coffee station. And then, as I point out, Neighborhood Window was way set back there. So my hypothesis is a lot of people never really even saw it, much less had an opinion on it. We also asked, in addition to sort of these general questions, was it good, bad, indifferent, we asked about, well, what kinds of experiences did you have? And so we actually have logs of things and observations, as well as some responses from the survey. And I'll just mention a couple of them here. About 50% of the people who asked questions had some kind of screen pop by auto speaker ID. Now, if you did the math on the earlier page, there were about 40% of the people who participated. So this isn't a huge skew, but it's not probably surprising. I suspect that people who were, more part of the community might have been a little more likely to try out something new and be willing to expose something about themselves, and might also be the same kinds of people who, would be willing to ask questions. I don't know. I don't know if there's more sociological, but there probably is a lot of sociological things going on at a conference that I'm not even aware of. One of the interesting things we observed is that we intended that this would be just augmenting oral practice. We expect that people would walk up, introduce themselves, and there'd be a screen pop visually stating the same information. It turns out a couple of things happen. Again, with the auto speaker, just like we take a talk, a couple of times people walked up to it and kind of waved their tag, and as I mentioned, we kind of were very conservative about tuning it so that it didn't pick up, people standing behind the person asking the question. That resulted sometimes, another thing people do sometimes, they bend way over to ask a question. Well, again, if you bend over, not only is your tag far away, now you're shifting the plane that the tag is in, which limits the read range as well. And so sometimes people didn't get picked up, so they kind of wave their tags. But one of the more interesting things that happened was that people sometimes would walk up and point. They'd walk up, "Hi, I'm Joe McCarthy, and that's me over there," for example. Or we'd see people that would actually just walk right up and just start asking a question, fully confident that the visual display was taking the place of what they already would have done. There were some other experiences with auto speaker ID that I'll cover on the next slide, as those of you who were at the conference know that there's more to this story. One of the things that people told us, so I mentioned before that auto speaker ID was irritation-based research. It's always nice when, when I find out that other people share my irritations. And in fact, people did comment that they liked the fact that they could now have the spelling and they could understand what, they knew who was actually asking the question. They had better context. With Ticket to Talk, as we'd hoped, we had people engaging in conversations. We actually also had just nodding, sort of acknowledgments of people. When they'd see the display and then they'd kind of acknowledge each other, which was probably more than they would if they would otherwise have not had a display there. I mentioned that, one of my passions is Amarone. I discovered that the lab manager at Intel also was interested in Amarone, but was always wondering, he never had it, but he'd always seen it on the menu and wondered about it. So he got in this long discussion. Here's this guy I share space with, never knew anything about it. In another case, we found out that 2 people who were graduate students from different universities, but one of them was at the same university for a semester, and were good friends, never realized they were both into kite surfing. But this one person, one of them had a kite surfing photo and Ticket to Talk. And the person goes, "Wow, you're into kite surfing?" "Yeah, so am I." Turns out they had both been kite surfing off of Boston at the same time they were there, and they never knew about it. And the last one is that we had an example where someone didn't actually take advantage of the actual ticket, but because we had the name and affiliation, someone turned to the person next to them, "Oh, you're from the Play Studio. I've always wanted to learn more about that. Can you tell me something?" Now, arguably, they might have noticed that from his tag, but I think the fact that it kind of popped up there more, in a more visible way, kind of led to that conversation. Neighborhood Window had similar kinds of effects, people getting to know each other. though there was certainly more of a novelty factor. After all, most of these people were computer scientists. They were wondering, how is it getting those words anyhow? And what kind of visualization, so they're kind of really interested in the technology underlying it, we heard reports of. As I mentioned before, there were, some common acquaintances, common events. And there was even, we kind of designed this knowing that it would make mistakes. Two people, this is reported to us, that one person reported in the survey that, I was standing by a neighborhood window and red bishops came up. And it actually linked me to this other person who also supposedly had red bishops somewhere on their website. And we started talking about it, and neither of us could understand why this came up. So, okay, so it failed, sort of, because it came up with something weird, maybe. But it got them talking. I don't know where they, followed up beyond that. There were some unanticipated experiences as well. One of the most interesting things was some people gamed the system. Surprise, surprise, some people filled out their profiles with information that, in a certain dimension, wasn't entirely accurate, perhaps, in representing their true identity. The most surprising thing to me was that, of those people, this one generated the most comment, University of Tigger. 24 people in the surveys commented that about something about, I noticed that people were, having fun with the system. Well, interestingly, of that 24 people, 18 of them actually liked it. They said that it jazzed things up, it kind of, it got things going, and it added value. I was thinking that, this was actually, I was cringing every time this was happening. And these are actually all supposed friends of mine. Well, I don't know Bill, but as you might expect, it wasn't really Bill. I'll get to that in a minute. Another example was Trevor filled out a tag, but his intern stole it. And it was a case of radio frequency identity theft. And she kept on slipping it to people. And, they'd walk up to, this is at Ticket Talk in the coffee break area. And so all of a sudden someone would pop up and, saying, I'm Trevor Paring. And so he said, oh, yeah, I'll show you. He goes to fill out another profile for himself on the real Trevor. And then two interesting things happened. One is he forgot to grab the tag, or maybe he grabbed the tag of the person before him, walked up to the microphone stand, and he was actually impersonating yet another person at the conference. So the joke was kind of on him. Then another time he came up and he was actually, I'm the real Trevor. And the last time he came up to ask a question, he actually had one tag, one RFID tag in his name badge, the other one was in his pocket, and it kept on flipping, toggling back and forth. Fortunately, it fell on that. And the last example I'll mention here is that one person actually had a different digital persona every time he came up to the microphone stand. And one of them I just selected here was Bill Gates. And interestingly, even this person, who was also explicitly noted in the surveys, some people liked it and some people didn't. So even though I thought this was very disruptive and not so good, it still had a good effect. Let's see here. I'll just mention that some people tried to use Ticket Talk very provocatively, and in this case succeeded. One of my colleagues put up something of these people all have clothes on. I purposely have it low res, but he wanted to spark conversation about digital representation of the self in physical places. Someone saw it and said, "Who's Ken Anderson?" And he was actually standing right by, and they actually had a very good conversation about the very issues he was hoping to talk about. And the last set of things I'll mention is two things related to the neighborhood window. One is, I mentioned red bitches before. Another thing that popped up was Death Valley. One person turned to the other person and said, "Oh, Death Valley, were you there?" The other person says, "Yes," thinking, meanwhile, in fact, we talked about this at Chi last year, and the fact that you don't remember it means that you don't place much importance on this relationship. So, there was kind of this, so they had this conversation, and, one person had one interpretation of it, and the other person had the other interpretation of it. And then, again, a so-called friend of mine, in fact, collaborator, Dave McDonald, actually taped his tag on the RFID reader, and people were walking up wondering, well, who is this Dave McDonald anyhow? And so after I discovered he had done that, I removed the tag. But actually, it is interesting that I know all of these people, and I don't know how much the fact that they knew the person who was leading this project led to their feeling that maybe I can have some fun with it. But the other thing is, if the conference had gone a week or two, it would be interesting to see whether more playful things happened or less playful things happened over time. Just to give you a feel for some of the tickets we saw, about half of the tickets, so we did a little bit of analysis of the tickets, but we never really asked people what was your intention behind them. So about half the tickets were work-related. I actually thought much higher percentage would be. So we had people with pictures of sort of, high glossy images of their projects. This is Norbert Streitz's group, the island work that they were doing. Other people had like screenshots of their systems. This is an INS context, we're prototyping toolkit. I forget which, John, you know, I forget which device that is. One of the many, this is actually part of the demo program. Some people were actually choosing to have tickets to talk that reflected the things they were showing in their demos, their posters, or elsewhere, sort of had this self-referential effect. There were books there. If you just published a book, so James Laney's new book had just come out, so he was pushing that. Some people chose logos of their projects as well. So that's kind of a representative sample of some of the things we saw sort of on the work front. But, and this was not surprising as well, half the people gave us things that had nothing to do with work, at least as far as I could tell. Lots of travel photos. At least I assume they're travel photos. I mean, if these people are working in these exotic locales, they've got them made. You know, things like hobbies, especially when it comes to music. Lots of car pictures and bike pictures and biking pictures and hiking pictures, kind of related to that. Other sorts of sports activities were frequently used as tickets. You know, there were famous figures of various kinds that were people, I assume, affiliate with or have some affinity to, whether it's a musical group or perhaps a political candidate. Probably the single largest category of things was family photos. So there were lots of people with photos of their kids or what I assume to be their family, although I suppose that's just an assumption, so I never really found out. And then pet pictures. Lots of people were, you know, happy to talk about their pets. Okay, lessons learned. Well, prepare for failure. So at the last minute, we discovered there were some networking issues. We were using the Wi-Fi network, and I won't go into details, but I don't know if anyone's ever tried to, you know, take and deploy something in a place that wasn't your own, but the hotel's system wasn't exactly what we expected. And in fact, well, anyhow, so that created a bunch of problems. Another set of problems were that we didn't have enough kiosks. To be honest, this was not long after a lot of the negative feedback came out about Benetton and Gillette and Walmart, and all these people were, oh, you know, RFID tags, bad stuff. What is this invasion of privacy? I want no part of it. And I thought, you know, I don't think many people are really going to want to play this game. But, you know, I figure out of the, again, we were saying like 375 people, out of that number, I'd say maybe 10% of them are good enough friends of mine that they'll do it just because of me. You know, I think we got close to 50%, but I think we would have had almost everyone play if it was easier. There were huge long lines at the kiosks. In part that was because we didn't advertise the fact you could create your profile using your laptop offline. Part of it was because when you actually hit the submit button, we went out at that point to your home page. The German guy I mentioned before with 1.5 million words, that took a while to crawl, grab, you know, and so, you know, there were some limits there as well. We had a long discussion about what if someone, like, you know, puts a pornographic image or some kind of really disturbingly violent image that's going to pop up? What then? And we thought about all these ways. Okay, we'll give you a special ID number and, you know, protect identity theft and all this kind of stuff. I was actually concerned, not that, you know, you'd put a pornographic image up and then walk up to the microphone stand yourself, but maybe, and this did happen, right, you might create something and stick your tag in someone else's badge or do something else, right? So we decided rather than have this elaborate protection scheme, we just have a kill switch. So I actually sat up by the auto speaker ID computer, and there was a button I could press. I was always within a reach of it, that if something really awful came up, I was there to try to, you know, cut it out right there. We didn't have any protection on the others because we figured not enough people would be affected at a given time. I already mentioned the issue about noise, and probably anyone, you know, it's obvious to many people anyhow. I just want to mention too, limits of informed consent. Again, because we're very concerned about privacy, once the crawler went out to your homepage, grabbed all the words up, it then showed them to you and said, is it okay if we use these words? Well, if there's 1.5 million words that are popping up in this window, really, what does it mean to say that's informed consent? So I just, you know, I'm not sure, we didn't come up with a good solution to this, but I just want to mention that there's a potential conflict here between, you know, the statistical paradigm where you're used to grabbing lots of stuff, and then sort of the user interface, the UI paradigm where you're, you know, expected to get consent all the way along the way. Okay, in terms of future work, if we were to do it again, I mentioned, you know, we had to tune the antenna on the microphone stand. We just use a floor mat, or we use some other kind of augmenting sensor and just, you know, simplify that. I already mentioned this issue about the queue. We'd manage the queues better. And, you know, we might try to do some other interesting things. We just kind of grabbed words. Neighborhood was the last thing we built. We did the simplest thing we could think of that would still have, hopefully, good impact. But I think that if we could do something like the What's Happening system that goes around and crawls around, grabs images from home pages and creates a collage, or the web collage system. Actually, if you ever remember the web collage system, I had to keep this thing. This is actually looking for search terms, I forget on which service, and then goes out and does an image search. I don't think it's Google, though. Comes back and grabs those images. I had to sit there for a long time before I could get a snapshot that had no pornography in it. And even then, you can see there's a scantily clad person there. Okay, but actually, so if we were going to do it at a conference, those are the kind of things we would think about doing. But actually, I think there's all kinds of other opportunities for this kind of work. So outside of the conference context, so I live in Woodinville, and a lot of Microsoft people live in Woodinville. And I've been to a couple of parties at their houses where they have their laptop open, and it's just doing a screen show. Here's some family photos. And I actually really like this, because I get to learn so much more about what's going on in their lives. Graduation photos, so I didn't even know your son was playing soccer or whatever. In an ambient way, it's informing the other people who are coming by. It's about something about this person's life. Well, what about if my photos could be included? Is there some way, again, an ambient, implicit way? I mean, I'm not going to walk up, hey, I got my discount key. Mind if I add my photos in the mix? That's kind of presumptuous. But if there was some way to enable that, maybe through a camera phone or some other kind of mechanism that would allow us to pick that up from the visitors, I think that, that opened up all kinds of new possibilities. Digital workplaces. Okay, I have this idea of knowledge management through serendipity. It's not so, the Intel lab here has only about 20 or 25 people. We all know each other. At Accenture, we had over 1,000 people at Technology Park. I knew some of those people, but not most of them. And there were a lot of people with whom I had sort of a nodding acquaintance with. We arrived at the same time. We left at the same time. So our nameless faces, faceless names. One of the nice things about the fitness center was I got to know some of these people. And through knowing some of these people, we actually exchanged, even though one person in particular comes to mind, we're both wine fanatics. We discovered this accidentally. We started, talking about it. And then it turns out he wanted to know, oh, you're in that research group I hear so much about. What's going on? And so I was able to feed him a lot of information, which he then was able to, we had an informal channel that we created. I don't know enough about knowledge management or, a lot of these things to really know. It's just a hunch I have, though, that I think that a lot of good knowledge sharing can take place through personal relationships that can be built, so that even if you had something like Ticket to Talk, say, you have bad control doors all over the place here. What if you had displays in some of these? And as you come through, up pops your Ticket to Talk for 5 seconds. The next person comes through, oh, you learned something new about your coworkers that you otherwise wouldn't. And maybe you don't do anything about it. Maybe you don't even say anything, but you kind of get a feel for what are people like here. And if nothing else, it builds a stronger sense of community, and it feels like a better place to work, because, these are interesting people I work with. Of course, you probably already know that anyhow, right? It's my thought, after all. And the last dimension I want to mention is this idea of digital third places. So there's this notion that the home is the first place, the workplace is the second place, and third places are essentially places where people can gather outside the home and the workplace. And so there's a fabulous book that I highly recommend about this called The Great Good Place, written by Ray Oldenburg. And I just grabbed a few photos of some examples of either some existing ways that people are using technology in some of these places to try to enhance a sense of community, and some other things that people might want to try. So again, the Here Now system is being deployed at the Crossroads Mall. Actually, Ron Scher, who's the creator of Crossroads Mall and Third Place Books and a bunch of other things, is mentioned both in this book and the companion book as well. So he's very much into this sense of building places that enhance a sense of community among each other. This is actually Third Place Books Ravenna, which also has free Wi-Fi, but as far as I know, have you done anything at that place? Okay. This is actually the Urban Grind, a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. My colleagues in the People in Practice group at Intel are also looking at ways to take advantage of the Wi-Fi there. So far, what they've done is they have something called CowCam. They have a webcam. I've seen this more and more coffee shops. They have little figurines. So like while you're waiting at the place where they put your espresso or latte up on, they've got some kind of figurines you can play on, maybe a Zen garden or something you can play with, fiddle with while you're waiting for your coffee to come up. Well, this place has actually a cow and a pig, and people can come up to it and they can adjust them or whatever, and then take a picture and then comment on it. So, and then they can make this available to other people through this website, ugcommunity.org, I think it is. I can send some link if you're interested. And again, this is a coffee shop where they very much want to build a sense of community. This is the Allen Computer Science Center at UW. If you haven't been there, every floor has all these common areas. They've got Wi-Fi throughout. Again, I know you're looking at the architecture school, but this is another place that seems like it would be a prime target where some kind of augmentation could take place in a useful way, especially given the technologically sophisticated nature of many of the inhabitants of that place. That's Victrola, where you see a bunch of. You actually see this a lot of times. Well, some coffee shops have high concentrations of laptop users, and others have smallers. But I know it's another place that's been targeted by the social computing group. This is again the Bellevue Public Library. So this is actually the Lowry player in the context of playing at the Bellevue Library. The Elysian Brewing Company, Tangletown in Green Lake, has Wi-Fi. I don't include this only because of it does mention bars up here, and Ray Oldmar does talk a lot about the English pubs versus the Irish pubs versus the German beer garden and so on. I don't know anyone's done anything there yet, but boy, that'd be sort of another interesting dimension to look at. There's actually a hair salon in Milwaukee called King's Head Hairstylist that has Wi-Fi. I had to look that up just because it said hair salon. I think, oh, come on, what hair salon is going to have Wi-Fi? But it turns out there's at least one. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the gamut of that. Okay, now another dimension to look at would be not only new context, but again, I mentioned content before. Maybe we could take advantage of some of the existing content. Okay, I know we create a special profile. I know that's been the case with the other stuff that I'm aware of. But is there a way to take advantage of existing content out there and bring that to bear in a way that makes it easier for people to play? And then maybe other kinds of devices, say loyalty cards that shops are using, these Barrett chips, which are now implanted on people. I don't know if you heard about these. They started out just being implanted in animals, so you could track your animals. It turns out there's a nightclub in Barcelona in which, if you're a member of the VIP club, you can have, and it's injected, so it's not like a big operation, but you can actually have this small RFID chip injected into your skin. I think it's in the neck. And supposedly, they instituted the program in April. As of May, when I read the article, 6 people had signed up, which surprised me. I wouldn't have thought that many. And then the claim is that, it doesn't give you any special privileges. It's no different than actually having your card. But the benefit they claim is that you don't have to carry around your wallet. So I'm assuming this is targeted more at women who are less likely to have pockets, perhaps. I don't know what it is, but I don't know the demographics of the people who actually signed up for it. And of course, there's iPods that are, increasingly prevalent, and in fact, you can now get iPods with Bluetooth, and you can, so you can imagine broadcasting your musical preferences based on a playlist to the environment in a way that doesn't require you to fill out a profile, but just make it available. And of course, camera phones can provide pictures and contact lists and other sorts of information. Maybe even the tunes that you've chosen as your ringtones could be interesting sources of content. Okay, so just about to wrap up here. Just want to note that although I'm up here presenting, this is actually the work of a lot of people. In particular, I had 3 fabulous interns working with me on this project who are now all off, back to their homes or in new places. So David Nguyen, Al Rashid, and Susie Strochak all helped build just about everything you saw there. Dave McDonald at UW School and the faculty there was a great deal of help in crafting the evaluation, and was actually co-author on the paper that we have coming up at CSW 2004. We had a bunch of people on site who were actually there to help do the observations, conduct interviews, and collect all this wonderful data. Ended up spending almost the entire time putting out flyers, helping people manage the registration process, and do a lot of things they never anticipated having to do. And then tons of other people who helped us design, build certain components, like the thing that turned on the signal strength, the antennas, and so on. Last slide. Okay, any questions? I'm happy to stay a bit for questions here, but feel free to email me at some later point. There's more information on my website. If you're just interested in private displays, there's an easier URL to remember that you can go to figure that out. UbiComp.org will both take you to the current conference, which starts Monday, Tuesday, I don't know, sometime soon. I'm not going this year. And we'll also give you information about last year's conference. And that's it. So thanks for your attention. And do we have time for questions? All right.
Questions for Joe?
John.
So your systems and all the other Revelationary computing systems are very careful about not invading people's privacy. But what if you wanted to kind of explore those limits? What kind of system could you build, or has anyone tried to do that?
I know that some of my colleagues in Seattle are exploring using the experience sampling method, the limits of how people regard privacy with respect to location-aware applications. Gravitational Phase Lab. I don't know if you're familiar with the work that Ian and Sonny and others are doing. So I think that's one example. I don't know if there's enough of a critical mass of work yet that, people have intentionally set anything up to probe those limits. But that's actually one of the criticisms I've gotten about this, that we were too safe. And I think it was in part a reaction to, I had this meeting 2 weeks before the conference where the privacy squad essentially said, can we pull the plug on this? No, maybe we can craft this in such a way, but I think it would be interesting to explore it. And I think especially the other contexts that I mentioned would provide an opportunity to do a longitudinal study so that we see how things evolve over time. And I think that with an established place, it would also give us the opportunity to maybe push on some of those issues and to see, where the line is more effectively. If we gave people more freedom about what to share. I mean, this may be something that you're teasing out with Here Now as well, where you're allowing people to share like a URL and the posting and so on. But I think the more you can allow people to co-opt the technology for themselves, you'll see what they're comfortable with. It's a good question, though, because I don't know how to do it, because if you're going to deploy something and you want it to be used, if you go online, you're dead. Like with MusicFX, I once had a colleague say, hey, why don't you try the following? Just play random music. Don't even respond to the people who are there. See what happens. And I thought, if people ever found out I was treating them like guinea pigs, they might stop using the system, and then, we've lost everything. Well, maybe not from a research point of view, but I think they have to be balanced. So, long answer to your question, but no, I'm not aware, other than the work that's currently being done in our lab. Are you aware of any work that's going on? I mean, you're looking at location stuff.
But, so did anyone, you went and mined their home pages, right, and came up with all of the keywords. Did anyone object to any of the keywords that you found?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to go back and see how we log things to see if I can find. That's a really good question, though. We did give people the opportunity to delete individual words, or you could just do a Control-A and delete the whole gamut. Well, I don't know whether people ever object to it. Now, I do know that in the survey, we did not explicitly ask about privacy. We figured if someone felt we had gone over the line, they'd tell us about it. And the fact that only one person commented on privacy, and that person wasn't commenting on our system, but on the Spotme Conference Navigator, which is a handheld-based system where you can put something about yourself, and then you get to find out about others sort of in a 10-meter range. And she was really upset about the way that was used, and she felt like she was on display and being stalked. And I actually read an article in the Wall Street Journal about the same system that had a similar complaint. So I think that the fact that no one complained probably says we were too cautious and we would like to do more. But that's a great suggestion, though. We should go back and look at the logs and see whether anyone opted out at that point. Thanks. Another question? Comments? Good. All right. Well, thanks again for your attention. Thank you. All right.